History Secrets.
In many religious traditions, the story of the fall of Lucifer is presented as the moment when a powerful celestial being rebelled against God. According to this widely known narrative, Lucifer would have been an angel of great beauty and authority, but his pride led him to desire a higher position. This ambition would have caused a rebellion in heaven, and the result was his expulsion from the divine presence. Interestingly, when we return to the oldest biblical texts, we notice something surprising. The complete story of the fall of Lucifer does not appear in a single direct account. Instead, it was built over time from the interpretation of different passages scattered throughout the Bible. These passages belong to different books, prophets, apocalyptic texts, and later, theological traditions. To understand how this narrative was formed, we need to begin with one of the most well-known passages associated with this tradition, a fragment from the book of Isaiah. The passage most frequently associated with the fall of Lucifer appears in the book of Isaiah. Isaiah chapter 14 verse 12 contains a phrase that would become extremely famous throughout history. "How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn. You have been cast down to the earth, you who weakened the nations." In the original context of the book of Isaiah, this fragment is part of a speech directed at the king of Babylon. The prophet uses poetic language to describe the fall of a ruler who had exalted himself excessively. The image of the morning star represents someone who appeared elevated and powerful, but who ended up being brought down because of pride. When this text was translated into Latin, the expression morning star was translated as Lucifer. This word means bearer of light. Over the centuries, some Christian interpreters began to associate this figure not only with the king of Babylon, but also with a spiritual being who had fallen from heaven. Thus, the passage in Isaiah came to be read as a possible symbolic reference to the fall of Satan. This interpretation would become extremely influential in later tradition. But it is not the only biblical passage that contributed to this narrative. Another image frequently related to this theme appears in the book of Ezekiel. Another passage frequently associated with the tradition of the fall of a celestial being appears in the book of Ezekiel. Ezekiel, chapter 28, presents a speech directed at the king of Tyre. Just as in the book of Isaiah, the prophet uses highly symbolic language to describe the arrogance and the fall of a powerful ruler. The text states that this character was in Eden, the garden of God. He was adorned with precious stones and walked among stones of fire. Ezekiel, chapter 28, verses 14 and 15, describes this character as a guardian cherub, someone who had been placed in an elevated position. But the text states that his corruption began because of pride. His heart was lifted up because of his beauty, and for that reason, he was cast down to the earth. In the historical context of the book, the passage appears to be a metaphor about the fall of a king who considered himself divine. But throughout Christian tradition, many interpreters began to see in this description a possible symbolic reference to the fall of a powerful angel. Thus, this passage ended up being integrated into the theological narrative that describes the rebellion of Satan. But there is yet another text that presents a much more direct image of a celestial conflict. This vision appears in the book of Revelation. The most direct image of a celestial conflict appears in the book of Revelation. This text presents a dramatic vision of a battle in heaven. Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 to 9, describes the episode. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought, but they did not prevail, and there was no longer a place for them in heaven. The text continues by stating that the great dragon was cast down to the earth. He is identified as the ancient serpent, the one called the devil and Satan. This passage provides one of the most important foundations for the idea of a rebellion among the angels. Here, a spiritual conflict clearly appears. On one side, Michael and his angels. On the other, the dragon and his forces. Throughout Christian tradition, many interpreters began to associate this dragon with the figure previously identified as Lucifer. Thus, different biblical texts began to be brought together within a single interpretative narrative. Isaiah describing the fall of a morning star, Ezekiel speaking of a cherub who was cast down to the earth, and Revelation presenting a celestial battle. But some ancient traditions expanded this story even further. They appear in texts preserved outside the traditional biblical canon. Among the ancient texts that expand the narrative about the fall of celestial beings, one of the most well-known is the Book of Enoch. This manuscript was written during the Second Temple period and preserves traditions that circulated among ancient Jewish communities. Within this text appears a detailed story about a group of angels called the Watchers. According to the narrative, these angels descended to the earth and chose to live among human beings. They took women from among the daughters of men and transmitted knowledge that previously belonged only to the celestial world. Among these angels appears a character named Azazel. The text states that he taught men how to make weapons, swords, shields, and other instruments of war. Other watchers are said to have taught astrology, enchantments, and different kinds of hidden knowledge. Within the narrative of the Book of Enoch, these teachings are presented as forbidden secrets, knowledge that caused great corruption and violence on the earth. This story ended up being associated by some interpreters with the idea of angels who rebelled against the divine order. Although the text of Enoch does not use exactly the name Lucifer, it contributed to the formation of the tradition that speaks of fallen angels. But the story of the fall of a celestial being does not appear only in ancient Jewish texts. It also appears in later theological reflections. Throughout the first centuries of Christianity, theologians began to gather different biblical passages to build a broader understanding of the origin of evil. In this process, the figure of Satan came to be associated with the idea of an angel who had rebelled against God. Some interpreters suggested that this being had occupied a high position among the angels, perhaps even a position of great authority. But his pride would have caused a rupture with the divine order. This interpretation appears in several theological writings of the early centuries. Christian authors sought to explain how evil could exist within a creation considered good. The idea of a rebellion among the angels offered a possible answer. Evil would not have been created directly by God. It would have arisen from the free choice of a being who decided to depart from the divine order. Within this tradition, the fall of Lucifer came to symbolize the danger of pride, the moment when an elevated being attempts to exceed the limits of his own nature. But even with these interpretations, the biblical texts remain relatively discreet about the details of this event. They present images and symbols, but leave wide space for reflection and interpretation. When we analyze the biblical traditions and ancient texts together, we realize that the narrative of the fall of Lucifer did not arise from a single detailed account. It was gradually built from several images and interpretations. The morning star that falls in the book of Isaiah, the cherub who is cast down to the earth in the book of Ezekiel, the war in heaven described in Revelation, and the stories about angels who became corrupted in texts such as the book of Enoch. Over the centuries, these images were brought together within a single theological tradition. Thus emerged the narrative known today, the story of an angel who exalted himself, a rebellion in heaven, and the expulsion of an adversary who would become a symbol of evil. But many modern scholars observe that biblical texts frequently use symbolic language. These passages may reflect reflections on power, pride, and downfall, themes that appear repeatedly in religious traditions. Thus, the figure of Lucifer remains situated between history, interpretation, and symbolism, a narrative constructed over time from different texts and spiritual traditions. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of the story of the fall of Lucifer is the way it has passed through centuries of religious tradition and theological reflection. Even being built from different texts and interpretations, this narrative became one of the most well-known images associated with the origin of evil. It appears in sermons, in theological treatises, in works of art, and in countless literary narratives throughout history. The idea of an elevated being who falls because of pride became a powerful symbol. It represents the danger of excessive ambition, the rupture with the divine order, and the consequences of surpassing established limits. These themes appear repeatedly not only in religious traditions, but also in philosophy and literature. Thus, the figure of Lucifer came to acquire a meaning that goes beyond a simple character. It became a metaphor about the nature of power, freedom, and responsibility, an image that continues to provoke reflection on the origins of evil and on the limits between light and darkness within human experience itself. Throughout this documentary, we explored evidence, accounts, and discoveries that attempt to explain this historical event. But one question remains unanswered. If everything happened exactly as we believe, then why are there so many contradictory records? Why do certain details seem to have disappeared from official history? Perhaps because this mystery has not yet been fully resolved. And perhaps there are still clues waiting to be discovered. Because some secrets of history are still waiting to be revealed.